Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. I am Arfa Khanam Sherwani. Though the topic of our discussion today is a piece of history, but it still affects our life, the way it affects the composition of our parliament and the way we elect our political representative. We are talking about the Poona Pact of 1932 today, which was signed between Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and Mahatma Gandhi. What exactly was the Poona Pact of 1932? Why was it signed? How did it affect India? And what kind of political circumstances were there under which this pact was signed? We will try and answer all these questions in the next half an hour. And I have with me today Dr. Vivek Kumar, who is Associate Professor, Sociology, JNU. My next guest is Chandrabhan Prasad, Dalit thinker. We have Dr. Rakesh Sinha, a well-known RSS thinker. I have all these people on my panel, but before we actually go and start asking questions to our panelists, I would like to tell you the terms of the Poona Pact. Of course, we can't go into the description of it, but I would like to lay down a few points of Poona Pact. Seat reservation for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes in provincial legislature. The SCs and STs would form an electoral college which would elect 4 candidates for the general electorate. The representation of these classes was based on the standard of joint electorate and reserved seats. About 19% of seats were to be reserved for these classes in legislature. The system of election to the panel of candidates in both central and provincial legislature should come to end in 10 years unless it ends on mutual terms. So this is exactly what we are planning to discuss, and also we will try and raise the question that how does it affect our politics today? And I mean, actually our politics would have been any different if there was no Poona Pact. Dr. Vivek Kumar, I would like to start with you that before we start actually discussing the Poona Pact, what kind of circumstances were there which led to Poona Pact, and what exactly was communal award? We would also like to understand that what was separate electorate and how did the idea of separate electorate emerge?
Look, separate electorate in simple terms can be argued in the way that actually the Dalits at that time they were untouchables or now ex-untouchables. Baba Sahib called them as depressed classes. They were awarded 2 votes in one constituency. With 1 vote, there was a primary election first, and in that candidates from scheduled caste were elected. Then they would go to contest in the main constituency. Now in the main constituency there will be 2 candidates, one will be Dalit, another will be upper strata or whatever the caste or general caste. Dalits will have 2 votes. With 1 vote they will elect their own candidate, and no other caste will be allowed to cast vote in favor of Dalit candidate. Only Dalits will be electing the Dalit representative. But Dalit will have another vote by which they will be electing the general caste person. So with that actually it was thought that only the true representatives of the Dalits will be elected, because Dalits will be voting for them, and the general caste candidate will also not be overlooking their rights, because he will also depend on the votes of the Dalits. So in that sense, the political representation of Dalits was very much powerful, and they could vent their grievances or whatever demands they would have. That was separate electorate.
Since in this program we are also trying to make it a little informative and educative besides analyzing the qualities of Poona Pact and how did it affect India in general. Dr. Vivek Kumar, why do you think Mahatma actually opposed the concept of separate electorate? What were his arguments?
Yeah, Mahatma Gandhi was at that time was talking about that this dual vote to Dalits and Dalits electing Dalit themselves, this will divide the society. And the Hindu society will be divided on the caste lines. Baba Sahib Ambedkar argued against this, that look, elections come once in 5 years, and if Dalits vote once in 5 years separately, how is it going to divide the whole society which is already so divided? So I think that was one of the reasons that Ambedkar did not budge for the separate electorates, and therefore Gandhi went on to fast on to that. arguing that this separate electorate should be taken away. Though Mahatma Gandhi had accepted separate electorate for Muslims, separate electorate for Sikhs, but he did not accept separate electorates for the Dalits.
Right.
So that was something very much undigestible to the Dalits even today.
Right. Chandraman Prasad, do you think in the hindsight Gandhi was right? Do you think it actually attacked the Indian nationalism, the Hindu society?
Well, if you see the term that was used, Poona Pact, that means there are two parties and the two parties have come to some understanding. And in my view, in the known history of India, it was for the first time that Dalits and the larger Hindu society came at a platform where they pledged that now we will go move in the society in this manner, and rights were granted to Dalits. Gandhiji was wrong in the sense that after the defeat of separate electorate that Dr. Vivek Kumar was referring to, Gandhiji went on to become chief of the drafting committee and constitution maker of this country. But because there was no separate electorate, he was defeated twice in first parliamentary election and again in a by-election. Think of a situation that the constitution maker of a country is defeated, is not allowed to enter the parliament. So it is in this sense that the very purpose of two parties, and when I say two parties, it is not Baba Saheb Ambedkar and Gandhiji. From Hindu side, Madan Mohan Malviya signed the agreement, yes, along with others. From Dalit side, Baba Saheb, MC Raja and others were there. So it was a good thing at that time. It would appear a good thing that two parties have come to some kind of agreement. But what happened later? Had there been a separate electorate, and there would have been a situation whereby most genuine Dalit would get elected to parliament and state assemblies, and the issues of disparity would have been solved.
I will come to it, that what kind of impact that it had on Indian society 70 years down the line now after independence and 84 years after the pact was signed. I'll come to you, Dr. Sinha, but for the benefit of my viewer, Dr. Vivek Kumar, just explain this to us, that 148 seats were to be allotted to the depressed class in the provincial legislature, and this was more than double from the 71 seats as promised in the communal award. Don't you think that Poona Pact actually was more generous to the depressed classes than even communal award?
Not at all, not at all. You know, in a sense that when you are talking about genuine representation, even if it is, you know, less, it doesn't matter. But the impact of more seats did not occur because the candidates who were to be selected or who were to be elected, they did not depend upon the Dalit votes, because no constituency in India is having majority of Dalits as such. There are sumptuous number, that's not, but the election of a candidate, of a Dalit candidate or reserved scheduled caste candidate, is not dependent upon the Dalit votes. It is dependent upon the upper strata or the general caste person. So it is usually what happens that the upper caste choose a person who is a stooge to them or who listens to them, and in that sense the impact for the representation of the Dalits goes away, and the person who is elected in the joint member constituency only represents to the powerful people. So that the impact of more number of seats was reduced because the representatives were not real.
Dr. Sinha, what is your opinion on this? A lot of people, even they go to the extent saying that this was actually a conspiracy by the Britishers to divide Indian society. The entire concept of a separate electorate, there is one section of India at least who still argues that the entire concept of separate electorate in India was kind of conceptualized by Britishers to divide the country, and it actually ended up dividing the country.
There is no doubt the Britishers played the game, and that game was based on their premise divide and rule. And they used it in every dimension and every class. But having said that, in late 20s, Baba Saheb Ambedkar changed the narrative of Dalit consciousness. Earlier to him, the narrative was based on social upliftment and the dialogue with the so-called upper castes. Baba Saheb Ambedkar has given a political voice that sharing in power is one of the criteria which can lead the Dalit emancipation. You see, there was a Poona Pact, there was also Munje and Raja Pact. MC Raja and Munje, there was a pact. So there are two things happened after the Poona Pact. You know that there are two perspectives of Dalit emancipation. One was Baba Saheb Ambedkar's perspective, but that perspective emerged not as a reaction to the caste Hindus' unthinking conservatism. I say unthinking conservatism. There are two types of conservatism. One thinking conservatism, which Malviya represented, Munje represented, Mahatma Gandhi represented. The other dominant section was unthinking.
How do you categorize unthinking
Unthinking,
representatives?
those who considered Dalit as a religion part of Hindus, but they were not ready for a social democracy. They were not ready for economic democracy. So here what happened that when Ambedkar was refused temple entry movement, the Satyagraha in Nasik, he experimented everything. When he found that the unthinking conservatives dominate the Hindu society, then he came with the political voice. And that political voice was reflected in his assertion. But Ambedkar was a flexible, I call him a statesman. He was a very flexible. He wanted the nation should not be divided. And at this juncture, when he entered into Poona Pact, his concern was Mahatma Gandhi's life, and also he considered that the Mahatma Gandhi is fastened to death, and Ambedkar's demand for separate electorate and Britishers pushing the separate electorate created a mass consciousness both among the Dalits and non-Dalits.
Before you go on, I would like to quote Ambedkar here, and it shows the extreme disappointment that he had, which he actually jotted down years after he had signed the Poona Pact. He says, and I quote, "There was nothing noble in the fast. It was a foul and filthy act. The fast was not for the benefit of the untouchables. It was against them and was the worst form of coercion against a helpless people to give up the constitutional safeguards." Do you agree with Ambedkar?
No, I think Congress, that was a dominant political force, has always treated Baba Saheb Ambedkar as a second-rate citizen. He was defeated in a South Mumbai constituency. Jawaharlal Nehru visited twice to ensure his defeat. And before that, he entered into Constituent Assembly with the help of J.N. Mandal in Bengal.
And despite the fact that he was given the job of authoring the Indian Constitution, do you think that he was actually rated as a second-class citizen?
But you see Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar in the holistic concept. His speech in the Constituent Assembly, when at the fag end of the Constituent Assembly, he had given the speech in which he appealed to the nation to be conscious that India should not again become a slave of any alien power. And he said, we were enslaved not by our own weaknesses, but due to Mir Jafars and Jaychans. And he also said that this is if we are getting enslaved next time, that will be a permanent slave. My concern is that Mahatma Gandhi had very progressive view regarding that, because after that, you see in 1933, Mahatma Gandhi started Harjan Yatra. That 9 months yatra started from Wardha, reached to ended in Kasi, Varanasi. In 9 months yatra, he did 3 things. He started a Harjan Patrika. Then he started Harjan Sevak Sangh. He collected almost 8 lakh rupees. He created a mass consciousness among the caste Hindus that it is not a question of a mercy.
But Dr. Sinha, my point is that besides the fact of untouchability, that he was really sincere and genuinely trying to do away with untouchability, what was his roadmap, his plan for social, economic and political development of the Dalits?
Arfan ji, but
Yeah.
I think let me include here, if you are saying that untouchability is a part of caste system, then I think Guru Golwarkar ji is wrong. Because Guru Golwarkar ji says that actually untouchability is not part of caste system. It is not part of dharma. So what was Gandhi doing? Was Gandhi really trying to emancipate Dalits from the religion, or was he trying to only emancipate from untouchability? Because untouchability is a very small part of it. We are not talking about, Ambedkar was for a Jinjante, a palatial narrative of deconstruction of the caste system.
Right.
So why egalitarian society is not emerging? And second, Gandhi was only doing a lip service. When Ambedkar talked about Guru Ayur temple, or even actually, in South vacuum satyagraha, it was not led by Ambedkar. It was not led by Gandhi. It was led by Periyar. and Periwar was
Right.
leading. So I think instead of augmenting the process of deconstruction of caste, Gandhi reified caste.
So you even disagree on this part, which he
yes,
says he was
of
trying
course,
to. But
he
I'm
was
saying,
not-
what
he was not
Gandhi-
at all
right.
humanitarian.
What was Gandhi's plan, Mahatma Gandhi's plan for the upliftment of the Dalit society, especially when it comes to their fundamental constitutional rights, political rights?
Poona Pact is the beginning of legitimate rights of Dalits in legal terms. Before that, it was a question of Dalits were either a object of altruism or the subject of a social reform. This narrative, the narrative has changed. Both Mahatma Gandhi and Ambedkar agreed that Dalits have their fundamental rights in politics, in economy, in social life, with a dignified life. Second important thing is that that I don't say that what Mahatma Gandhi was doing and what Ambedkar was doing, both were contradictory. They have their own perspective for Dalit emancipation, but there was a third point of view. What he was quoting Sri Golwalkar. RSS was started in 1925. First thing we did, that Dalits should not be treated as an object of social reform. Dalits are integral part of Hindu society. Their economic empowerment and political empowerment is most important thing.
Right.
What happened in a contemporary India? Dalits are what Mr. Vivek Kumar and Chandrabhan Prasad have already pointed out. Dalits are being co-opted.
I need to take a break.
There is need, not the co-option of the Dalits. There is need that natural leadership should be developed and they should be recognized.
Right. Dr. Sinha, I need to take a break. Time for a short break now. We'll come back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. We are discussing the Poona Pact of 1932 and whether it still has its impact on Indian politics and society. We are now joined by Professor Salil Mishra. He's a well-known historian. Professor Mishra, so far we were discussing about the history and what kind of circumstances led to separate electorate and then Gandhi fasting unto death, and also the emergence of the circumstances under which Poona Pact was signed. Now I would like to know from you, what kind of political picture we would have had seen if there was no Poona Pact? Do you think Indian politics, society would have been different if there was no Poona Pact but separate electorate?
Well, my personal opinion is that separate electorates are not a very healthy and positive thing for a democracy. Separate electorates were granted for Muslims in 1937 elections and 46, and we know the kind of disastrous impact that they had. I think within a democracy, we have to look at more inclusive and better ways of integrating various groups. So I would support that being opposed to separate electorates, looking at weightage, looking at representation and various other forms is a much healthier way of taking our democracy forward than separate electorates. Separate electorates actually paves the way for separatism. And I think in modern societies, it is not separatism, it's integration. Integration with weightage, integration with representation, integration through positive discrimination. Various other ways have to be explored. Separate electorates is not necessarily the only way and not the best way through which the interests of a group and community can be advanced, and they should not be advanced.
So do you think if we see in the hindsight that Ambedkar was wrong asking for separate electorate?
If you look at Ambedkar's speeches in this at the round table conference, he is supporting joint electorates provided we have universal adult franchise. He says joint electorates are better, but we must not have restricted franchise. Franchise should not be confined to the elite. It should be made adult and universal. And once you have adult universal franchise, there should be joint electorates. So it's not true that Ambedkar was always a votary of separate electorates. He was not.
Right. Dr. Vivek Kumar, now fast forward to present. Now for the last 70 years, we've been practicing that we have reserved constituencies for SCs and STs. Why do you think that the purpose of political representative of Dalit community has not been able to or have been able to serve through reserved constituencies? Don't you think it's as good as separate electorate?
First of all, I don't agree that separate electorates divide the society, because I've already argued that, elections come only once in 5 years. And you are voting once in 5 years separately. How can it divide society, which is divided at so many pretexts? You don't allow them to go into their food habits, don't allow them to enter into temples, don't allow them to take water, don't sit with them, don't celebrate with them. How can you say that a society will be divided only voting once in 5 years separately? So I don't agree with that. It's a hilarious construction that separate electorates divide the society. Second thing is that when you have made joint electorates, that means that the real and emphatic representation of Dalit is not emerging. Their people use and choose only those people who listen to the majority, and majority in any constituency belongs to the general caste candidates, and therefore the impact of representation through reserved constituency has not been realized in today.
You don't think it's the genuine leadership of Dalits, but it's the party leadership?
That's what, because people we have seen, they are actually closed into SC/ST cells or Anusuchit Jati, Janjati Prakosht, and they speak the language of their political party, whether it is right, whether it is left, or whether it is center.
So is it the fault of the Dalit leaders or the political parties or the political system?
It is the majority which decides which language will they speak, because ultimately they are elected with the representation of the masses, and masses are with the political parties of the day. So right,
which means you are saying that BJP, you're saying the argument in favor of the separate electorate is still alive.
It still is required, because then today BJP says that we have maximum number of Dalit MPs and therefore we represent them. How is it? Because the Dalit MPs are not elected only on Dalit votes. They are elected on general caste votes, which are majority.
Right.
And you can show, actually, there are 79 to 80 constituencies which are reserved in parliament. No constituency has a majority of Dalits.
Right.
So
I'm running short of time. Professor Dalit Mishra, the argument comes back to you that there are thousands of villages in India which are still practicing untouchability. There is a discrimination against Dalits. We know there is an economic and social embargo that they are victim of. We know they're not allowed to go to the temples, even basic facilities like public facilities, even going to the temples, access to water. How can we say that only a political separate electorate would have done the damage which the social practices have not?
Very briefly, three things. First, of course, the social question is extremely important, for which we need social movements, we need a social revolution with an element of moral revolution and so on. The notion that separate electorates will suddenly solve the problem, suddenly solve the day-to-day problem of discrimination is a false idea. Secondly, in democracies, representation should not be segmental as far as possible. The representatives of the people should, as far as possible, represent the territories.
Professor Salil, there were 2 votes. By 1 vote, they were supposed to elect Dalits, and by 1 vote, they were also supposed to elect general caste candidates, and therefore there was not separatist element in that sense.
That is true.
Please complete your argument. Yeah.
So, as far as political representation is concerned, leaders should ideally be representative. They represent the territories, and they should be representative of all the groups who occupy that particular territory. The notion that exclusive political representation will solve the social problem is a false notion. For social problem, which is a problem of day-to-day discrimination, for that we need a much larger framework, movement, revolution.
Right.
The third point that I want to make is that
I'll come back to you. Dr. Sinha, tell me one thing which is very, very important now, 70 years down the line after we've implemented and also practiced the reservation policy for political constituencies. We still know that Dalits have made to the higher offices in India, highest offices in India, but despite the fact there is still opposition at the panchayat level. So do you think the fears that Ambedkar had, his inhibitions, are right today?
Coming to that, as far as separate electorate is concerned, that is based on binary. The basic objective of the society is to end the binary in society, social dimension, in cultural dimension, religious dimension. So you are adding one more binary.
No, leave it for a moment. So, I'm saying the reserve constituencies for SC/STs, has it worked?
No, I just say that there is still untouchability in large part of India. They are being discriminated, and I see the question not from the only caste angle, but there is a feudal caste domination. And that feudal caste domination should be demolished through the social action. Salil Mishra is right that there is a larger social action.
Not the political action.
And here I say that you just see that for the first time the RSS started surveying the villages, and the Mohan Bhagwat ji in his speech pointed out that how the percentage of untouchability using water, using the public places. So I think that social action is very required, but I agree with Vivek Kumar that political parties should not treat the Dalit leaders,
Right.
just as an appendix.
Right.
They should create a mass consciousness and choose the leader who could deliver better
right,
for
right.
the understanding of the Dalits and the social integration.
Mr. Prasad, 20 seconds to you.
Well,
Just wrap it up for us.
yes, the Pune Pact was not between Dalits and state. It was between Dalits and Hindu Mahasabha. The Hindus, the promises they gave that we will end untouchability, we will end discrimination, we will bring Dalits to at par with the rest of the society, that promise has not been fulfilled.
Right.
And now Hindu society is supposed to be led by RSS. It is the duty of RSS to go and stand at a television and a newspaper office and say that where are Dalits in this studio and in this newsroom.
10 seconds, sir.
Can I make my third point? It is true that all the constitutional safeguards and everything that has been done has proved to be absolutely inadequate. Therefore, we must exercise our imagination.
Right.
But that does not mean we go back to separate
Right.
electorates.
Thank you
we
very
need
much,
to be
gentlemen.
innovative.
So this is time for us to wrap it up. And you know how polarizing this issue right now at the moment. After 84 years of Poona Pact, there are many questions which we are left with. But we'll have to wrap it now. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.